An Affliction of the Heart by Anonymous Pegasus. Chapter 6. Exposition. Kuno stirred slowly, her eyes fluttering open and a low groan leaving her muzzle.
Water,
the changeling croaked, her voice raspy. A moment later, a water canteen was pressed against her lips, and she drew the end of it between her two large front teeth, suckling several large gulps of water. After several seconds, she drew back and panted hard for breath, blinking slowly up at Warden.
How long have I been out for?
Kuno asked, trying her best to sit up. The world tilted crazily, and she gave a low groan, immediately laying back down, closing her eyes. A day, Warden said as he stoppered the canteen and set it aside, frowning down at the changeling. A gentle hoof touched at her cheek, and then lifted one of her eyelids, peering down into the depths of her eye. Warden pursed his lips. This would be so much easier if you had pupils. Kuno snorted once, pushing his hoof away and then throwing a hoof over her face.
I feel terrible.
You turned into a dragon, Warden pointed out, sitting down beside her and then laying himself out gently alongside her, rubbing a hoof down her form soothingly. Kuno nodded, keeping her eyes closed and a hoof over her face.
Indeed I did.
I didn't even know you could do that, Warren gushed, wrapping his hooves around her. That's awesome!
Awesome and entirely death-defying,
Kuno murmured, squirming slightly in against the Pegasus and nosing under his wing, pulling it over her face to block out the light. So it's not a normal thing to do, Warren asked, gently stroking a hoof down her form over her wings. Kuno shook her head weakly.
I've only ever heard one of the other changelings do it, and she was my former queen. An entire army of the royal guard where I come from cornered my former queen. She turned into a dragon and decimated their ranks.
Warren nodded gently, stroking a hoof down Kuno's side slowly. And what happened?
She died when she changed back,
Kuno stated simply. Warren's ears pinned back. She died?
The transformation takes energy both ways. She was a very strong queen, maybe even as strong as Chrysalis. But the amount of energy needed to transfer that amount of mass gets harder and harder the larger you go. An alicorn is a small step up. A minotaur starts to get really strenuous, and anything larger than that requires immense energy.
Kuno trailed off, nosing gently against Warden's wing and giving a faint sigh.
At least she didn't suffer. She just died.
So, you're not originally part of Chrysalis' hive? Warren queried. Kuno shook her head against his wing.
No, my hive was from across the sea. I don't really like to talk about it.
Warren nodded gently at that, stroking his hoof soothingly down her form. What happened at the hive?
Which part specifically?
Kuno asked warily. Well, all of it, really, Warren said, rubbing his temple. It's all just a giant blur to me.
What do you remember?
I remember waking up this morning and heading towards the Badlands. But after that, I can't remember. Warren scrunched up his face, trying to concentrate, to focus. Kuno nodded gently.
Changeling magic. It muddles your mind. It's how we integrate with our target's life at first.
Warren nodded, frowning. If I wasn't trying to remember, then I wouldn't really even notice. Carefully, Kuno peered out around the edge of Warden's wing, blinking up at the light slowly.
Well, first we were met by a stone wolf and a changeling.
Did it try to eat me? Warren asked, concerned. Kuno shook her head.
It was on a strict diet. No junk food.
Warren rolled his eyes.
Anyway, the stone wolf was Chrysalis.
Whoa! The stone wolf was Chrysalis? Warren cut across her. Kuno nodded once. Warren blinked slowly. But why?
Reconnaissance?
Warren raised a brow slowly. But why not just get a changeling there?
So she could size us up before we got to the tower, I guess.
Kuno said helplessly.
I barely know her. It might be tradition.
Warren nodded reasonably. And after that?
Well, we went into the tower, and I spoke with Chrysalis.
Warren frowned deeply, rubbing a hoof against his temple. I remember something like honeycomb.
The windows.
Kuno said with a slight smile.
They're constructed from hexagonal pieces of glass. Makes them look a bit like a honeycomb, yes.
And a bed with a plushie on it, Warren added, rubbing his temple. Kuno pricked her ears upward at that.
That's problematic.
Problematic? Warren asked, raising a brow. Kuno nodded.
She's pinning after shining armor.
Whatever gives you that idea? Pausing for a moment, Kuno tilted her head up to peer at Warden. A single ear perked.
Warden. She was going to marry him.
But that was for... Warden trailed off, rubbing a hoof against his chin.
Yeah, for nothing. You didn't really think that her marrying him was an integral part of some evil plot to take over Canterlot. She could have done that any time she pleased. The marriage didn't have anything to do with the whole thing. It was just convenient for her to do it all at once.
So Chrysalis is in love with shining armor? Warren asked faintly. Kuno gave a thoughtful sound at that.
Perhaps. I don't even know if she can feel love.
Warren gave a nod at that, pausing and then hugging the changeling tightly. I'm glad you're not like the rest of your species.
All the cute and none of the personality, huh?
Kuno asked smugly. Warren smiled, kissing her forehead. Something like that. So, how'd I get hit with changeling magic? Was it Chrysalis? Kuno shook her head.
Chrysalis told us to get out, and as we were leaving, I was jumped from behind. You got dragged off by another changeling. I'm guessing that he used a spell on you to force you to project me onto him?
Warren blinked slowly. Him? Kuno nodded simply.
Was definitely a male. I saw that.
Warren's face drained of color. Nothing happened, right?
Oh, sure.
Kuno crooned smoothly.
I got to you in time. I won't tell you what Chrysalis put you through, though.
Warren's ears perked up.
Suffice to say that it involved a double-ended toy with a vibrating function.
Warren stared at her. You can't be serious.
I'm not.
Kuno giggled, bopping his nose with her hoof and grinning innocently. So, you got dragged off. What were they hoping to achieve? Warren queried, nosing in against her cheek slowly.
I guess Chrysalis hasn't been feeding them. It's been nearly 2 years. They're still out there in the Badlands. I haven't heard whispers of her coming looking for anybody else either. Could be signs of a civil war starting.
Warren blinked slowly. A changeling civil war? That sounds complicated. Kuno nodded once.
Indeed.
And you turned into a dragon, Warren pointed out. Kuno gave a wry smile.
I did.
What's it feel like?
Empowering.
Kuno gushed, wiggling slightly in place.
I was so freaking huge and everything was so small. I could have toppled that giant tower with a swipe of my tail.
You weren't scared of dying? Warren asked, his tone mildly concerned.
I was in the grips of change euphoria. The more energy we expend in the change, the more, well, alive we feel. Plus, I have something that my former queen never had.
Warren raised a brow. Kuno pushed closer, rubbing her nose against his own with a smile.
I have you.
Warren smiled at that, shaking his head and nuzzling his cheek against her own. So, did Chrysalis say if we could have kids?
She confirmed what I already suspected. I'd have to stay a pony for the entire length of the time.
You already suspected? Warren asked, frowning deeply.
I wasn't willing to risk the full on unfounded speculation.
Kuno said, mirroring his frown.
I'm childish and goofy, but I'm not reckless.
Changing into a dragon notwithstanding. Kuno grinned at that, shaking her head.
That was a calculated risk. And besides, I have a never-ending supply of love to recover with.
Warren huffed at that, wrapping his hooves around the changeling and pulling her tight against his chest. You just love me because I feed you. Kuno giggled, kissing and then nipping gently at his chin.
Plus you're kinda handsome.
Psh, sweet talking me, trying to get more food, Warren accused, nudging her playfully. Kuno just smiled, pulling him into a kiss. So, Warren started, peering down at her. We gonna go through with it?
The full?
Yeah,
Definitely.
Kuno said with an earnest nod.
Especially now that I got confirmation from Chrysalis herself.
Warren pondered on that for a long moment. But I foresee a problem. Kuno pricked an ear upward. You're gonna be a pony for 9 months, and there'll be no more freaky changeling sex, Warren protested, nudging her with his nose firmly. Kuno giggled and shook her head.
I'm sure you'll survive. It's not like we can't enjoy our physical attributes if we're both ponies.
Warren gave a nod and then a sly grin. But I was kinda thinking. These holes in your hooves. Warren gave Kuno a significant glance. Kuno rolled her eyes, giggling and swatting him with a hoof.
Pervert.
After several more hours of recovery, Kuno decided that she was capable of basic locomotion, and she and Warren began the long walk back to Dodge City.
So what's our plan?
Kuno asked. She had adopted the form of an earth pony again. Warren raised a brow at her. I figure we'll walk until we get to Dodge City. We catch a train, and enjoy each other's company on the train itself. A sleeping car, a bottle of wine, these holes in your hooves. Kuno snorted, sidestepping and nudging him powerfully with her nose in rebuke. I meant in a more grand scale. Well, we can die and become flowers and the grass. The circle of life continues, Warren said with a sage nod. Kuno snorted and nudged him again. Quit being difficult or I'll grant you those ideas you keep alluding to. Warren paled slightly and then smiled faintly. Okay. Jeez, I figure I'll start up the farm first. Once I get some money together, we'll have a nice wedding. And then you can go up to pony mode for a long time and we have that foal you want. Kuno pondered on that. Why not pony form before the wedding? It'd save time. And mess up the wedding, Warren pointed out. How so? Kuno asked, bewildered. Warren slowed his steps, frowning at the changeling. Well... Kuno raised a brow at him, likewise slowing. Spit it out. Don't want me looking fat in the photos or something? Warren shook his head, sidestepping towards the changeling and then wrapping a hoof around her shoulders. It feels like it's important. I feel like I'd regret it if you were a pony at our wedding. Kuno blinked at that, confused. What else am I supposed to go as? A rabbit? As yourself, Warren stated flatly, peering at her for a long moment. I want to lift your wedding veil for our first kiss as husband and wife, and I want to kiss you. I don't want to be kissing a mask, some charade you're putting on. I want it to be you. Kuno gave a slow smile at that, shaking her head and throwing her hooves around him in response, kissing him warmly. You are so backwards, Warren. It's still me, no matter what form I take. But I understand what you mean, and I'm happy that you care enough about it. Warren flushed faintly, his cheeks warming as he said quietly, You think it's stupid. Kuno shook her head, nuzzling her cheek against his own. No, I really don't. It's actually rather touching that some pony cares enough about me to want me as I am, changeling and all. Then why not? Warren asked challengingly, nudging her with his nose and then kissing her warmly. After all, you have the goofy teeth, lovely pupilless eyes, bug wings, and a built-in armor, not to mention freaky hoof holes. Warren affected a lecherous smile, his tail flicking back and forth behind him. Kuno laughed, shaking her head and hugging around his neck tightly. I love you so much, you goof, she whispered, kissing his nose.